Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a beef stew using a bunch of root vegetables. I've got sweet potatoes, parsnips, potatoes, carrots, and then some kale and mushrooms and just deliciousness. We're going to do kind of like a beefy tomato, almost like a beef bourguignon broth for it. And then we're going to make some sourdough blueberry muffins with a lovely like streusel topping on it. So let's start by getting our chuck roast. This is just a really small chuck roast, but we're going to just chop it up and get it ready to kind of saute off in our pan. We're going to do just a short little sear off in it. That way it will stay nice and tender and juicy, and then we'll throw it into our stew at the very end because this is like what I call like a quick stew. Doesn't have to simmer all day. We can get it and have it ready in about 30 or so minutes. So it's just a nice kind of way to do it quickly versus if you want to do the slow cook where you simmer the meat for hours to make it extra tender as well. Okay, we're going to do just nice little bite-sized pieces because, again, I think you're not going to be cutting up your meat with a knife when you're eating a soup. And you can always just buy, like, already cut up, stew meat if you wanted. I really love a good chuck roast. I feel like it's really delicious in stews. On there, the only thing, this one doesn't seem to have a lot of fat in it, but if you do find those really big fat veins, you just want to kind of cut those out. So we'll cube this up, and then we're going to season it with some rosemary, thyme, onion powder, garlic, salt, and we'll sear it off in our little Dutch oven here. We'll probably do it in batches because, again, we have just a small Dutch oven today to fit everything in it for our little lunch. But it's nice and chilly, and it's a stew day. It's one of those things. So like last week when I checked the weather, it said it was supposed to snow today. It's not going to snow today, but I feel like every week I'll check it out, and the next week they're like, it's going to snow. It doesn't ever snow here in Tennessee, at least in the part of Tennessee where we live. Lots of promise of snow. The best is when the schools canceled because they're like, it's going to snow, it's going to snow. And then you wake up in the morning and you're like, I mean, there's some flurries, but I'm pretty sure we could have made it to school, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay with a canceled school day. They build in enough of them, so let's use them up. Any day that I don't have to get up at 6 or 5:45 in the morning is a win. Okay, just about have these chopped up, and then we're going to season them and we'll sear them off, and then we'll start working on the base for our blueberry muffins. Been kind of craving blueberry muffins. I know they're not necessarily like a winter themed muffin, but it's just one of those classics. They're just always delicious. And we're going to do ours with some streusel, like just a pale streusel topping. So I'm going to use just regular sugar instead of brown sugar, which I think pairs well better with the blueberry muffin. Okay, we've got our meat chopped up here. It's about 2.5 pounds. So this will be a nice and meaty stew. And then let's get this seasoned up. I've got my onion powder, which will give a nice, great flavor to the meat, as well as it's just going to give it a nice little crust on it when it sears up as well. So we're going to do this nice sprinkle. Probably going to use around a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half. You can be very generous with it. But while we're waiting, I'm actually going to get my oil heated up. I'm going to put in about a tablespoon of olive oil into my little Dutch oven here. And I'm going to turn it on over about a 6, so like a medium high. And let that start warming up so that our meat will be nice and hot when we're ready to toss our meat in. We're going to add some black pepper. Probably use about a teaspoon or so. We're just going to sprinkle it over the top. And then I have some dried thyme, and I'm going to use about a teaspoon. And we're going to, again, coat it over. I'm going to use some tongs to toss everything, but I want to have a lot of spices on it so that you get all these flavors, and any of those little spices that drop into the oil afterwards will just add more flavor to our broth. I've got some dried rosemary here. I'm going to do about a half a teaspoon. I find rosemary, especially dried, is pretty flavorful, so I don't want it to be too overpowering. And then lastly, we're going to do our garlic salt. I think, did I grab my brand new one? I did. I told you I never go without being understocked. Where? Ha, wrong cabinet. Skip. Before I open up the other one. Otherwise, I'll have like 3 floating around half open. A good shake over. This is about, since it's 2.5 pounds of meat, I'm going to use about, 2 teaspoons of garlic salt over it. Let me grab some tongs, and I'm going to just coat up the meat with all of the seasonings that are kind of around here. Just make sure to try to get as much of it on there as possible. And you can always do this in a bowl as well, but I find the cutting board will work. But we just don't want to lose any of those delicious spices. And then we'll do our quick sear off on it, which means our meat's not going to be kind of cooked all the way through. I want it to be more like a medium rare to medium rare, so that when we pop it back in at the very end, the heat of the stew will cook it all the way up, but it will keep it nice and tender. No tough pieces of meat. And that's just a really good technique to do for any of those quicker ones where you want to eat a nice rich stew faster than letting it cook and simmer all day. Okay, I think we're getting close to it being nice and hot. Let me grab a little drop of water, see if it's ready to toss it in to start searing off. You want to sear it off when it's nice and hot. Yep, it has a good sizzle. You don't want your oil to be cold or you're not going to get that good sear. Okay, we're going to drop this in here. Make sure you don't overcrowd your meat. So just make sure each piece of meat at least has its own spot on the bottom of your pan. Now, they can touch each other like, just loosely, but you want them to be able to, sear off nicely. And I'm hoping that I should be able to do this in 2 batches on here. Get these guys all seared off. Okay, I'm gonna get these last little bit for our first round, but you see I just have this nice base layer on the bottom of my pan. We're gonna let it cook up, and while we do that, we can work on our muffins over here. So for today's muffin, we're gonna do our sourdough blueberry muffin. Let's start off with our liquid ingredients. Let me grab one of my sourdoughs. We'll grab Gus over here since he's big and fat and he's allowed to share. I fed them up this morning, so this is a semi-active starter, but you really just need a discard or starter works for this. We're going to use a half a cup.
You have a question about the stew? Will you add flour to the meat?
So I'm going to do kind of a richer tomato-based broth on it. So I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to add the flour to thicken it up, but I think I'm just going to keep it with the tomato paste as a thickener for this on it. But I always kind of make that decision right when I'm done with when we're sauteing up the vegetables. I finally decide how thick I want it, whether I want it to be a thinner or a thicker one. So I might add a little bit of flour in there, but that decision is still being made as cook because that's kind of how I am. I just like to fly by the seat of my pants. Okay, we've got our half a cup of our sourdough discard in here. We're good with this for now. We're going to do 3/4 of a cup of sour cream. And I'm just kind of eyeballing it, but you can always measure it in to be more precise if you want. Do a little bit more. There we go. That should be about 3/4 of a cup. And then we're going to do a 1/2 cup of melted butter. And I am using salted butter. Give it a good shake. But before we mix this in, I want to flip my meat here because this doesn't take too long for it to cook up. And essentially, I just want them to have this really nice sear on both sides while still remaining like a nice pink in the center of it. The second side is going to cook a lot faster than the first side because it's already done most of that work of heating the base of the meat up. These over. And knowing also that when I take this out of the pan to let it rest, because we'll then saute all of our vegetables into this, it is going to continue cooking from that residual heat. So I think the biggest trick to make sure that you have nice tender chunks of meat in your stew is just really make sure you don't overcook it at this part, because again, it will cook a bit more on the plate and as well as the broth when you throw it back into it. Put this guy. Okay, I think we're just about ready for it to pop off our first round. We'll give it a quick toss. It's looking good. So again, these should be still pink in the middle because they'll continue cooking for the residual heat, but we don't want to overcook them. And then we'll throw them back into our hot stew at the very end. The cameraman is motioning exactly where they need to be placed. I will warn you that they are very hot for the moment. Okay, and then we're going to add in our last batch. And we'll get these cooking and seared off as well. And don't worry, you'll have all these tasty little bits on the bottom of your pan. We'll saute our vegetables up in those tasty bits, and then we'll deglaze the bottom of our pan. So they'll probably get a little bit crusted on, but that will add this just really great flavor to it. Here, slide those guys in. This one will be a little bit more snug, but I'm not going to do a third batch for 5 pieces. There. And they're almost all primarily touching that bottom there. So that's going to allow you to get a nice good sear on them. Okay, while that is searing off here, let's get our sourdough discard, our butter, our melted butter, and our sour cream mixed together. Then we're going to add in a 1/4 cup of cream, of heavy whipping cream. But I just like to get this starting that mixture. So, I should have an open one first. Let's get to that first. So 1/4 cup, I'm going to just put it right in here. Let's see. We'll just use, I have like 2 drops left. So we're going to just use the rest of it there. So 1/4 cup of heavy whipping cream. And then I have 2 eggs. So 1, 2. And then we're going to do a whole tablespoon of vanilla extract. And I have a feeling I'm going to need both bottles.
You have a question? Are these sourdough muffins?
So these are a sourdough discard blueberry muffins. So they'll have that nice, health benefits from using that discard in there. But the discard is not going to be the leavening agent of it. So we're going to be putting baking powder and baking soda in it. So we're going to put in a whole tablespoon of vanilla extract. That's going to give these just a great kind of a vanilla base to the blueberry muffins, which I think is really important when you're doing a blueberry muffin or a fruit muffin, that your base of it, your muffin base is well flavored. So pop those yolks, and we're going to mix our liquid ingredients together. Then we're going to add in our salt, our baking soda, our baking powder, and our sugar. And in just a second, once we get this kind of mixed in here, we are going to flip our meat that is nice and ready. There we go. Give this a good stir. I'm done with that. We'll switch to it. But our meat is starting to get these nice kind of edging around it. So I'm going to go in and flip them over. You can see we've got this nice, beautiful, like brown sear on it. Kind of hard to tell between the steam that's escaping, but it's got a nice little brown sear. And then we'll sear off the other side. Get these flipped over. Make it snug as a bug. And make sure when you're doing this searing process, keep your pan nice and hot. Don't turn down the temperature, or what is going to happen if you drop the temperature down lower, the meat is just going to let out more and more of its juices, which will give you a tougher end product. So sear it off. It traps those delicious juices inside the meat. Gives you that nice texture on each bite as well. And it will just give you a better end product. Okay, those are all just about flipped over. Before we finish working on that, let's get our onion chopped up so that we can put that in there to kind of caramelize for the next stage of this. So we're going to get our yellow onion diced up, because when we take this meat out here, we are going to then put it in there, caramelize it up, and then we'll work on our next sets of veggies. So we're just going to do a smaller kind of dice, just way you get nice little tasty bites in every spoonful, because the onion, I feel like, is such a crucial vegetable in any stew or soup that you make, because it is so flavorful that it really just adds the body and the tone to your broth, which is what makes your stew amazing. Okay. We're just about on this. Think about 30 more seconds, and then we'll have it nice. I'm just waiting for that to simmer. But you see all of this little bits of those juices and drippings at the bottom. That's going to add so much flavor to our stew as well.
Do you ever use a crock pot or slow cooker?
So I have both a crock pot, and then an Instapot. I used to use crock pots all the time back when I used to work out of the home, and because that was just like a godsend. It was such a savior to be able to pop stuff in there and put it away. But since I'm home now, because I do a lot of consulting and stuff from home, I don't do that as much. And while I love crock pots for that things, they don't give you the best end all product, because everything is kind of cooked up at the exact same time. So if I don't need to rely on it, I don't use it. But I do use my Instapot for a couple of things. It makes really great for carnitas, or that shredded pork or shredded beef or bison. Those work really great in the Instapot. I also, when we were remodeling our kitchen, we lived off of our crock pot and our Instapot in our little makeshift kitchen that we did in our office. And I will say, I was like, when I was done with that, I was like, I don't want to see these things for ever. And so I always sit there and I'm like, in some of my crazier soccer nights, I might have to venture back into maybe a crock pot meal every now and then. But I always feel like I can make a better soup or stew just on the stove on there. Although I did that a long time ago when the kids were little. I would prep a bunch of meals in advance to keep in the freezer, and that I could take out and pop in every day. We did that for a while. I'm going to turn my pan down to about a 4 now. I've got my onions topped in here. They're going to cook off in the meat drippings, which is going to give them a nice, lovely brown color for it. But as they're doing that, I'm going to just turn it down again. Let's work on our next base for it. So we have in here our sour cream, our discard, our eggs, our cream, our butter, and vanilla. So let's add in our spices and our sugars and salts and whatnot. We are going to add in a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So 1, 2, and then a half a teaspoon of baking soda. And these are what's going to give that nice puff up and rise on our blueberry muffins. So half teaspoon. And then let's get our sugar in here as well. We're going to do a whole cup of granulated sugar. And then we can mix all of this in. And then lastly, we will do our flour, but always wait to do your flour at the end. That way your muffin stays nice and fluffy, especially when you use a butter base instead of an oil base. Let's get these all mixed in. Make sure that baking soda and baking powder gets mixed all the way through. But it should start to make your batter a bit more fluffier as you mix it in, because it will start reacting with that sour cream and the sourdough discard. Which is going to make these muffins just so light and fluffy and delicious, but still have that great richness from the butter base.
Wanda says she's using that Japanese barbecue sauce and loves it.
Oh, good. I'm glad. That is one of those like secret. I feel like it's become pretty popular now, but it is so good. It's such a great way to like just add that nice little Asian flair to dishes without having to be like a master of the sauces and whatnot. It's just so good. Okay. I've got my base here. We're going to add our flour in, but I'm going to give my onions a quick stir. We have them cooking up again in our meat drippings. You can see some of that rosemary and all of the little spices in here.
Question: how soon after you start a starter can you use the discard for recipes?
So if you're starting it, they say for the health benefits best is after like day 5 or 6. But to be honest, you can actually use it in part. You're just not going to get the benefits of the sourdough in it. So a lot of recipes like this, you're not using your discard for any leavening purposes. So you could use it after day 1 if you wanted, if you had enough of it. But for it to have that nice fermented like kind of bacteria or that sourdough has, that you're not going to start getting until like day 4 or 5. Okay, we're going to put in 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And then we are going to mix these until they're just combined. You want a nice lumpy, chunky batter. So resist the urge to mix it until it's smooth. That will give you a dense, stiff muffin. The chunks in there, the thick, chunky batter, that is going to give you a nice, fluffy muffin. So we'll mix this until it's all incorporated. Again, I like to do this with just a spoon instead of breaking out like a hand mixer, because it allows your batter to just get mixed until the flour is incorporated and not any more. Hand mixers, they mix really fast. And so it's really easy to overmix. Here. So here we're almost to it. Beautiful. So you see how you've got some chunks in there. They're thick. It's gloppy. That's what you want. And now we're going to fold in our blueberries. You're going to use about a cup to a cup and a half. Just wash them and then pat them dry. You don't want to add too much extra liquid in it. I don't go less than a cup, because if you go less than a cup, you're going to get hardly any blueberries for it. And if you go more than a cup and a half, it gets a little too blueberry-licious, where you get more of a soggy muffin because the blueberries pop and put too much liquid in it. So that's kind of like that magic ratio.
It gets too much what?
Blueberry-liciousness. It gets a little too juicy. So we're just going to fold these in, and folding is just a simple technique to mix in without overmixing it. And that's just simply scooping down from underneath, picking up the batter and folding it over. It just allows it to evenly mix in there without overmixing your batter. There we go. Perfect. Okay, let's get these guys spooned out. Well, you know what? Let's see. Before we do that, because I want to get this next part in here, why don't we peel? Let's do our celery. Let's get our celery in here next, and then we'll do that. We can let this saute up. So I've got 3 stalks of celery, but they're pretty massive stalks here. So I'm going to slice them down the middle a couple of times to make them smaller for our stew here, because I love the added flavor of the celery into this dish, but again, I don't want it to be a super huge component of the vegetable, but more just that flavor profile to the broth. So we're going to dice it up fairly small. That way you'll get all of that flavor, but you're not just hit with a huge chunk of celery.
And how do you decide which order to put into the soup?
So I like to go, I start with the onion always, because the onion is the vegetable that just needs its time in the pan on its own to really bring out its flavors. Then I typically go celery next, but I feel like celery and carrots are one of those ones that you can do at the same time if you need to. But celery next, because it's one of those aromatic flavors that work really well, and you can caramelize its flavor as well. Then you kind of go after those two from hardest and firmest to softest. So it will be carrots, parsnips, potatoes, sweet potatoes, mushrooms, kale, in that kind of order, because the firmer, harder ones you want first because they're going to tolerate the heat better and longer, and they need more time to cook. The softer vegetables typically have a higher water content, meaning if you put them in there, they'll release a lot of liquid and make it to where you have got a soggy mess at the bottom of your pan. So I've got my celery in here. We're going to give this a quick stir and kind of coat it up. I'm going to give just a small drizzle of olive oil right here in the middle, just to have a little bit more of a base in there, about a teaspoon or so on there, because I don't want it to dry out too much. There. And we're going to let those kind of saute up. Let's get our muffins going. We'll have those baking up and then we can work on it. But celery and onions are these aromatic vegetables that if you get them a chance to really cook up a little bit more, here they are. They let out more flavor, and they'll make your broth nicer for your stew. All right, we're going to put our muffin wrappers in for each one. There we go. And this recipe, it makes about a perfect kind of dozen. Let me grab my spoon. We're going to scoop these in, and then we're going to make a nice little streusel topping on it, because who doesn't love a blueberry muffin with a nice mild streusel topping? So we're going to go through, and I'm going to put a big scoop in each one. I always try to make sure I divide up my blueberries as evenly as possible, so that, again, you don't have a couple muffins that are lacking and some that are over blueberry-fied. And then we're going to go back over, and then we're going to refill them all up. I fill my muffins up to the tippy top because I like that big, beautiful bakery dome on my muffin. That's the best part. Those muffin tops are the bread and butter. They are what makes the muffin delicious. So we want to make sure we emphasize that. Now, if you wanted to, you can definitely fill them up 3/4, and you could stretch this batter a little bit farther to make more muffins, smaller ones. You're just not going to get as nice of that dome on it. I know, it's one of those things that I actually don't own is a muffy pan, which if a muffy is just a term for the muffins with just the muffin top and a really small base on it. But I also find that muffins just don't cook up quite the same as a muffin. And so it's like you get the top, but it's just not the same muffin top as if you were having the whole muffin. So we're going to get these guys filled up to the tippy tops. And then I'm going to make a lovely streusel using our butter, sugar, and flour. And that we'll put on top of each one of these to give them, of course, that just delicious flavor. Now try to make sure when you're filling these guys up that you fill them up as evenly as possible so that they bake up evenly. That's why I go with little spoons over and just kind of make sure that they fill up that way versus trying to do a big glop and then you're having to go back and forth to make them even. Okay, we are just about even with everything now. And it is a nice thick batter, and that's due to the butter. Okay, let's give the celery and the onions a nice stir. Kind of coat it around. Turn it down just a smidge. Now for our topping on the top here, we are going to use my butter. Got a little bit things. Let me go pop this in the microwave for 10 seconds. It got a little bit cooled off. Funny how it is. That should get me there, but we can get everything else going while we wait. So we're going to use 1/4 cup of granulated sugar with 1/4 cup of melted butter. You want your butter to be melted or at least fairly semi-soft so that it can kind of come together nicely. So let's get our sugar in here.
So you have a question? Do the kids eat lunch at school or do they come home and eat this?
So I have a mixture of both. So some of my kids, they're in elementary school, so they get home even later. But both my middle schooler and my high schooler will come home and they're instantly like, what is it? So I do pack one of them a lunch, but he opts not to eat breakfast. He eats lunch, and this is like his second lunch. He's like a hobbit, you know, got to eat all the time. My oldest, she refuses to eat school lunch. And I'm just like sitting there and I just like, you know, if you get hungry, it's okay. And if she gets hungry, she eats their like cookies and their biscuits. And I'm like, well, that's not real food. But she always comes home and she's like, I'm hungry. And I'm like, well, good thing there's food typically ready right when they walk through the door. So they'll eat this. And then when Teddy's here from school, he has it after he wakes up. He has his second lunch, and he's just, I swear my kids are half hobbits. Okay, we've mixed 1/4 cup of sugar with 1/4 cup of melted butter, so you have this nice kind of sugar paste. And then we're going to add up to 1/2 cup of flour, but you need just enough flour to get a nice crumb that holds together but isn't too crumbly. So I like to just start with a little bit at a time to mix it in. And I just find that doing it with melted butter versus room temperature butter just allows it to incorporate a little bit easier versus having to like use your hands to incorporate it a bit more. Okay, we're getting there. We're starting to get our chunks forming. Add just little by little so you don't add too much in there. So give this a good toss through. And I might add a couple more pinches of flour because I want it to be enough to fall apart but hold together when you squeeze it. So I always say, if you know what kinetic sand is because you have kids, it's going to look like this, but if you squeeze it, it's going to form a crumb. So this is the texture that you want it. You don't want it to be too thick where it's all stuck together because then it won't cook up right. Is the little meat bites delicious? The cameraman is helping himself over there. Always seems to want his meat plate right by him. So we're just going to take our little crumbles here and we're going to put it over the top of each one. Now this is what I call a blonde streusel. So I make, you can do streusel with brown sugar or with granulated sugar. The granulated sugar is going to give you that paler colored streusel, which I think, and it has a more mild flavor. It's not as rich. And it works really well with like blueberry muffins, lemon muffins, muffins that you don't want that rich flavor of molasses in, versus if I'm doing like an apple or pumpkin muffin or one of those heartier ones, then I do a streusel with brown sugar in it. I'll put this over the top of each one, give it a little gentle kind of love tap to kind of make sure it all holds in there nicely. And then we're going to go pop these in the oven. Now, these without the streusel will cook for about 18 minutes at 400 degrees. With the streusel, they typically need a smidge more. Let's give this a nice stir real quick. That way we'll be ready for those carrots when we come back over. But the streusel topping acts like a coat, like a little insulator. So it makes the muffins take a little bit longer to cook. So we're going to pop them in here at 400 degrees. And I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes. And I find that it takes just about 2 extra minutes than my base muffin recipe to cook them, because it's like a little coat. It helps kind of keep it more insulated, weighs it down so it doesn't pop up as well. Let me wash my hands, get a little of that streusel off. And let's get this stew on the road before the cameraman eats all of the beef. And then I'll have to say, where's the beef? Okay, we've got our carrots, or not our carrots, our celery and our onions nice sauteing up. They're starting, the onions you can see are getting translucent. Let's get our carrots in here. I've got 2 pretty fat carrots. These are big ones. So they're probably equal to 4 of the smaller ones, of the thinner ones. You can always use baby carrots and just dice them up. But I do buy most of my produce in bulk because we're a large family. So get full carrots, which is very versatile because you can use full carrots a lot more ways than the baby ones. We're going to kind of cut off our tops, and they last longer. And because these are so fat and thick, I'm going to cut them up. I'm probably actually going to cut these tops up into thirds so that we don't have super huge chunks of carrots, because I like my stews where you have just good chunks of veggies throughout, but not necessarily like a whole carrot piece in every bite, but little bits. And they cook up a little bit faster, which is nice when you're doing a kind of a quick version of a stew, which is nice, especially when you want to get dinner or lunch out quicker and without slaving over the kitchen stove for too long. Okay. We'll get these diced up and we'll add in there. We're doing a lot of root vegetables in our stew today because I feel like they'll make it nice and hearty. They're going to bring out the flavors that we're going to use kind of in the make of our base of our broth. We're going to use tomato paste, beef bouillon, and a little bit of red wine as well, just to add this nice kind of richness to it. So we've got our carrots. So it makes it a nice hearty base to it. Toss those in here. We're going to give them a nice stir up, kind of coat them with those meat drippings, that residual oil. Don't worry if you have little bits of spices and onions and stuff sticking to the bottom of your pan. When we go to deglaze it with the broth and the bouillon, that is going to lift all of those up. And as they sit on the bottom of their pan, they're not burning, but they're caramelizing. So their natural sugars are bringing out this richness of flavor, which is just the best. We've got a parsnip right here, which looks like a white carrot. If you've never had a parsnip before, you can typically buy them right next to the carrots and the celery and like the radishes there. They have a lemony flavor to it, and they're more spongy than like a carrot. So they're not as dense and firm, but they have just a really lovely flavor to it. And I find that they work really well with carrots and sweet potatoes, and we are going to be adding a sweet potato in here as well. But they hold their form well. Now, they are a bit more fibrous than carrots, so a lot of times I'll use them in a sweet potato mash, but they're stringier if you mash them. but I feel like the lemony part of them is going to play well with the thyme as well as the tomato paste that we're going to be using. That acidity from both of them I think is going to work out well. Give this a quick stir. And then we'll pop those guys in there. And again, I'm trying to keep roughly all of my vegetables kind of chopped up fairly small. That's going to allow them to cook faster. The nice thing about when you're making a stew and you're pre-sauteing your vegetables instead of just dumping them all into a broth, you're starting your cooking process, which allows them to cook faster, but also enhances their flavors.
You have a question? Do you sit down every week and meal plan for the week?
Oh, I get asked that question a lot. I am terrible at meal planning in the sense that I don't meal plan at all. And I go to the grocery store and I typically pick out what food's on sale, what looks good, what produce is in there and stock. And I buy based on that. And I buy enough proteins and whatnot to get through the week. And then I have my pantry is loaded with all of my basics. And then every single day, depending on how I feel, that's what we make. So I can make, like with this chuck roast, there's 1,000 things I could make with them. Stews, roasts, sandwiches, pockets, do it. It's just how I feel. And if you have the staple ingredients, like all of your pantry basics, you can really change everything just with the different spices and flavors. And so that's kind of how I kind of function in the kitchen. It's one of my things my kids are always asking, what's for dinner tonight? What's for dinner? And I'm like, you can ask me right before I cook it and then I'll know. I'm just not the best at planning that far ahead. Now, part of the thing that makes this a functional thing for us is I do have 4 full-size refrigerators, which is crazy. I believe, yes, it's insane. I would normally not have 4 full-size, but I have collected them over the years. So when we moved into this house, we brought a refrigerator with us because we were like, oh, there's a fridge here. But then the refrigerator in this house, when we bought it, was a very old refrigerator, like old school with the, freezer on the top and the good old fashioned like 80s white appliance that's turned yellow. Still worked great because they don't make things like they used to. So it's still going strong out in our garage. So then we always had 2 refrigerators out there, which was great because one was, like a drink fridge and a produce. Then when we remodeled our kitchen, our ice maker, the tubing and the water connection line kept leaking and kept causing problems. And there was no way to fix it or kind of turn that component off. So we needed to replace it or to the fixing process was going to be almost as expensive as buying a new one. So we ended up to get another one, and there goes another refrigerator out into our garage where we now have ridiculous amounts. It's like you can win under every door, but they do allow us a lot of freedom in what I can cook and buying things on sale and having in there. So I have like a meat fridge, I have a produce fridge, and then I have a drink fridge out there. And then our insides are just our your yogurts or everyday items that you use. But it works for us and allows me to be not nailed down to having a meal planning, which I should probably do, but not today. Okay, we've got our potatoes in here with our things. Let's get our garlic in there. We're going to get our garlic kind of sauteing up at the bottom. Add a nice little flavor. Then we'll get our sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes cook up pretty fast, so that's one of my last vegetables I'm putting in there because it is a softer vegetable. We're going to do, I've got about some of them are small, so about 5 to 6 cloves of good-sized cloves of garlic. We're going to mince these up. It's going to be around a tablespoon or so. I'm going to make a little well in my pan, and then we will add this garlic in there to kind of cook up and bring those flavors. And we'll just add some really nice aromatic flavors with the celery and the onion to this dish. Okay.
you have much leftovers on a typical day?
So we typically have, like I say no leftovers, but that is because I cook all the food for my parents. So whatever is left over, if they're not joining us for dinner, just goes over to their house for them to eat. Um, so I always try to plan enough for us to feed our family with, of course, with them in mind. So when I make meals outside of lunchtime, I make them typically for 9 people. At lunchtime, it's smaller because not every one of us are eating this meal on there, but our dinner is typically I make for 9. Granted, a lot of our kids are younger, so I feel like, Jack, Teddy, and Evie on occasion, I feel like they eat what a normal adult will eat because they're little on there. But I try not to have too much. I'm adding just a little bit of olive oil in here so that garlic can toast up just a little bit. But I don't make super massive ones on there because I think our family, at least I feel like my kids have gotten spoiled that they're not leftover people. They do not like to eat leftovers. And so if I do have leftovers for some reason, like if, Thanksgiving, everybody has leftover turkey, you got to refashion them into a whole nother meal, like a turkey pot pie or turkey a la king or something like that. But even my husband's like, he does not like leftovers at all. I said he's been spoiled too much on there. But I think it's more of just making sure I buy the right amount of proteins or the right amount so that there's not too much because, you don't want to waste, especially when vegetables and produce, when your groceries cost an arm and a leg nowadays. It's always like, how did I spend this much on groceries every single week? And it's true. And you're like, I didn't even buy lobster or steak. I just bought the basics. Okay, we're going to go around. You can now smell that garlic is just lovely. Okay, let's get this sweet potato in here. So with sweet potatoes, I do not peel my sweet potatoes with a peeler because I find that is too much work. They are actually really easy to peel with a knife, and you get past the dry white skin. So if you look in here, a sweet potato has this nice tender and then this outer part, which is more dry and fibrous. When you peel with a knife, you get past that. If you do a peeler, it just kind of, you get stuck with that, and it's just not as nice. So what I always do is I always just cut off the top and the bottom so then you have a nice flat surface to hold your sweet potato on. And then you just kind of slide your knife over it, gently around it. And this is the same thing as how I peel like butternut squash, rutabagas, any of those weirder shaped vegetables. And then it's pretty easy too. Get these guys diced up. Now my sweet potatoes are again going in last because while they may feel like a really firm vegetable, sweet potatoes are actually fairly soft, and when they cook up, if you overcook them, they get mushy. So I add them in last so that I love the flavor of them in stews, but they are not ones that you can leave unattended in there or they will turn to mush. And a little bit of a sweet potato goes a long way. Get these guys up and ready. And the nice thing about it is all of these vegetables that I have sauteing in there, they're cooking, they're getting soft, they're getting tender, but they're getting their flavor just really infused in them instead of just being boiled and diluted out in a broth. And let's add our sweet potatoes in.
Do you know what you're making for dinner yet?
So, dinner. That is the question of the day. I am not 100% sure yet. I went grocery shopping, so I have way too many options. But I have an idea of what I might want to do, which uses some pork belly. I bought a big slab of pork belly from Costco. And so I might do recreate this dish I had at Dollywood over fall break there. It was this, they had their harvest festival on, but it was this pork belly on essentially like a naan or a pita bread with this little vinaigrette and a arugula salad. And so I have all of the ingredients. My husband's like, you don't need the salad. And I was like, it was a key flavor profile to it. So it is an essential. But I think I might do that for dinner tonight. Something a little bit different, but I think will work well. Change it up some. It was really, really good. In fact, we like got 2 of them because we ate it and then we went back for more because they were really good. So actually, I think I have the picture somewhere. I think I took a picture of it. I think I took a picture of us eating after it was eaten halfway because it was so good. We were like, oh, we should take a picture of it, and it's like, so you can't really tell what it was, but it was one of those things. It was nice. I always like to do those, you know, when you go to some of those places, they'll do like a food festival, like Disney World's done that. We did that one year at Epcot, and that was awesome. And we did one at Anakisa. They had a food festival, and Dollywood over fall break, and we did both of those because I always like to try new things to recreate them because for me, I don't like to get stuck making the same thing over and over. I like to be adventurous, make my kids keep guessing what they're getting for dinner tonight. So we're going to add in our mushrooms. This is about, you know, like 8 ounces of mushrooms sliced up. Again, I just buy mine in bulk, so we have them there. Give them a quick saute. And they should sink down just a little bit. And then we're going to add in some of our tomato paste and our spices for this next part. But let's get those kind of touching on there. Okay. Making a well because that is where we're going to put our tomato base so it gets a little bit of heat first. And so earlier somebody asked if I was going to do flour. I don't think I'm going to do flour in it. I think I'm going to have a rich enough base that I don't need it. We are going to do a heaping spoonful of tomato paste, which is going to be close to a tablespoon and a half. Just going to end up using the rest of this can. So this is going to give us a nice acidic base to our broth, which will add a lot of flavor on here. Before I mix it in, I'm going to add in some of our spices. I've got thyme. We're going to do about a teaspoon of thyme. And again, this is what we cooked our meat in. We added thyme. I'm going to do about a half a teaspoon of rosemary, not too much, maybe even a smidge less than a half, because again, it has a lot of flavor on there. Fresh rosemary would be great as well. We're going to do 2, well, these are all kind of small bay leaves, so about 2 full bay leaves. And now we're going to kind of mash it up and coat those vegetables up in that tomato paste. Really get it a chance to kind of bring out those flavors. And we'll kind of coat everything around. There. And you just need it to kind of cook up for just a few minutes while you do that because you want it to just get a little bit of that heat before you dilute it down. Now we're going to add in a little bit of red wine in here. Don't need much. We're going to do about a half a cup max, maybe even a little less. You're going to put it in before you put anything else because you want it to kind of hit that direct heat as well, kind of cook off the alcoholic content to where you just have that flavor. That's going to give you the kind of that beef bourguignon kind of flavor in there with the tomato, the mirepoix from the onions and the celery and carrots, and then that tomato paste. And give it a nice little hit here. And a push down, but even just, you can see it's already picked up all of those little tasty bits that were stuck on the bottom of our pan. Here we go. And now we're going to add in our beef broth, which I'm actually going to be using water with beef bouillon.
A question, what's the best type of red wine to add?
Honestly, whatever ones you have lying around. Uh, you cook it off so it doesn't really matter with the flavors. Again, you don't want to probably go with an overly sweet one, but really anyone that you kind of have lying around. It's kind of whatever we have lying around for it. There. So we're going to start with just a little bit of broth at a time or water. We're going to add our bouillon in later once we get it there. But we start with a little and then we add a bit more. Don't just drown it all in there with the liquid because it doesn't incorporate well. And it also kind of prevents, like it cools your pan down too much. So little by little, you're going to keep your heat nice and warm and you can add in just enough to keep it to where you want it. Here. Again, coating it up. And you can see how it's already we've got a thick base to it using just our thing. Let's add. And add a little bit more. And then we're going to grab our muffins out here in just a second, but I want to get that in there so it has a chance to kind of heat up. Okay, I think that's good. So we use just a little under 4 cups. We're going to let that heat up. When we come back, we'll add our beef bouillon in there and we'll let that simmer. But let's go grab our muffins out. We'll check to make sure they're done all the way. We'll want to make sure we give them the little tap on the top because again, with that streusel, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but they look pretty good. Yep, they look nice and firm. Just getting both mine on. But here is our beautiful blueberry muffins. You see how we have this just great big gorgeous dome on them? That's the bakery dome. That's where you fill them up nice so you get all of that delicious kind of muffin flavor there. So we're going to set these right here. Sit and kind of cool up. Again, we made our base of our blueberry muffins. We have our streusel topping on there, which was our granulated sugar, butter, and flour. But we have sourdough, a whole half cup of our sourdough discard in here, plus sour cream, sugar, 1.5 cups of blueberries, flour, and then a whole tablespoon of vanilla extract because that just gives you so much a nice vanilla flavor base that just complements the blueberries so well for our muffins, these are one of my favorite muffins because you can't beat a blueberry muffin. Okay, let's get our bouillon in here and then we'll chop up our kale. We'll get our meat back in here. We'll let this simmer up. Again, since most of our vegetables were already sauteing, they're probably mostly cooked through already, which is nice. And we'll taste and season everything, make sure we got it to where we want. And they'll be ready to serve up. So we're going to do a nice big heaping spoonful of beef bouillon. Kind of flavor it up. I like to use beef bouillon and water over like just the beef broth that you can get from the store because you can add a bit more of the paste, which gives you more flavor than if, using it. Because I find just store-bought like beef broth is so bland. Now, if you have a chance to make yours at home, then of course you can reduce it and get it to where you like it. But here, mix it up, and then we're going to make sure it's all dissolved. Perfect. I don't think I need to add anything else. And the nice thing is you don't need to add any extra salt because the bouillon has it, whereas if you use a beef broth, you will have to adjust and add a bit more salt. Okay, we're going to get a little bit of our kale chopped up. We'll get our meat back in there. And as that simmers, so I've got a couple leaves of our big dinosaur kale or whatever you want to call it. I think it goes by a couple different names. We're going to take off the middle stalk in there. That way you just have just the nice kind of leaves left over. Because I find that the center stalk of kale is pretty bitter. Even if you cook it down, it still retains that bitterness of it. So take it out. You're just going to have just the good leafy parts to it. And it's fairly easy. You're just going to kind of pull at the leaves and they should all come off fairly nicely. But if you want to use the pre-chopped kale, you use just about, 2 handfuls once they're all kind of cut up. So we're going to just chop it up so you have smaller little bits, because you don't want to be eating and then you pull out a huge string of kale. You can see our stew has already got a lovely rolling boil on it. And it's got a nice thick velvety broth in there made from our tomato paste, our red wine, our beef bouillon, and then the spices of thyme, rosemary, bay leaves, garlic. And it's chock full of carrots, onions, potatoes, sweet potatoes, parsnips. So we've got a lot of great vegetables in here as well, and then mushrooms. But it's kind of, like I said, it's a play on like a beef bourguignon. And we'll add in our sauteed off chuck roast that we have in just a second. But I don't keep my chuck roast in it when it's a quick stew like this, because I find that with beef, you go from being tender and then you have this stage where it gets really firm before it breaks down and gets super tender again as it, gets that fall apart. This allows you to get a nice tender piece of stew that isn't sitting on the stove for hours. Now you could definitely cook this and put it on there and cook it longer and have it simmer low for an hour, and it would be great. But this allows you to eat it and it be nice and tender then as well. Okay, let's pop in our kale. Now, kale is one of those ones that you can put in now and let it simmer. It's going to keep its form very well. If you're going to do spinach instead of kale, you're going to just drop that in right before you serve it, because it does wilt away fairly quickly. And now we're going to add in our beef chunks here. My husband's doubting my ability to get these in, but I think I can get these in I think there's enough room. Although this wouldn't be the first time that I have picked too small of a Dutch oven.
And how much tomato paste did you use?
I was probably close to 2 tablespoons, because I was going to use 1.5, but I finished off the can. So it's probably 2 tablespoons in here. So it's going to have this nice, rich, beautiful tomato broth to it. That is just going to have a lot of great flavor. We're adding in our chuck roast that we seared off. So it should have a nice kind of medium rare cook on it. Be nice and tender. Scoop this around and then we'll put our last little bits under. But just removing it out just allows you to prevent it from overcooking in the saute portion of the stew. And now it's got the juices and the flavors here. Looks like I'm going to get all of this in here. Barely, but we made it. Beautiful. And then a little bit of that juices to add a little extra flavor. See, my visual ability, spatial ability. This is why I pack the car on car trips. Every time, we go on our big camping trips every year, which is always a bit much, because you've got to put everything in our car to fit, our family of 7 for like a 2 to 3 week long vacation, which is a lot, including all the camping gear. And every year my husband's like, it's not going to fit. It's not going to fit. There's too much stuff. It's not going to fit. I make it fit. We might not be the most comfortable on it, but we make it fit. Okay, let's turn this down. Let's taste it now. Perfect. You can actually, the parsnips adds this lovely, I will say it's almost like a florally note there. It just plays well. Okay, let's get ready to serve up our lunch here. We need a bowl. And I'm going to get a little bit of Parmesan cheese to sprinkle over the top, because again, that is going to add a nice bit of flavor to our soup, because I'm impartial to Parmesan cheese grated on top of our soup. Ladle, and then we will be ready to serve up. Beautiful. Slide this guy over here. Okay. For lunch today, we have our beef and vegetable stew made with carrots, onions, sweet potatoes, celery, parsnips, mushrooms. We made a really rich and delicious broth using tomato paste, beef bouillon, and red wine, thyme, rosemary, bay leaves to add just like a great seasoning to it. Just a really nice hearty dish. And then, of course, some kale. And we're going to top it with some fresh Parmesan cheese, which is going to add just, again, a nice pop of flavor. And then for our dessert, because you need to have a little bit of sweetness, we have our homemade blueberry muffins with a nice, lovely blonde streusel topping on top, made with sourdough discard. So, of course, it has the good benefits of sourdough in it. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made. So we have our beef root stew. I feel like I'm going to call it beef root stew because that sounds fun. And our homemade blueberry muffins. And you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Dutch ovens, my bakeware, my knives, my cutting boards, all the different things I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.